man, when we do that intro, I just want the song to go on. That's one of my favorite songs. I still listen to it a lot. King of Kings by the band Barren Cross. And that takes me back a long, long way. Folks, this is the Through the Black show. Blast your paradigm is what we want to do tonight. We want to break the mind control. Just as I was praying before the show, we want to glorify God. We want to edify the church. We want to expose the devil. I got Pastor Shawn down there in Virginia riding right alongside me. And Pastor, I got a pastoral question for you. I'm actually speaking at my church this Sunday morning, and it's a Father's Day message. Do you have any advice for me? Or maybe you could just send me your notes. Are you preaching this Sunday?
Yeah, I'm preaching on Isaiah chapter 12 and the well springs of life, and kind of talking about the idea of how we can dip into the salvation of Christ, and how as men we need to be, men and women both just need to be full of God and kind of dipping into Him and looking to Him. Even if you didn't have a father, I'm going to kind of focus in, if you didn't have a father figure that was suitable. I had a great dad, but some people didn't. So I'm going to kind of focus this Sunday on, if you didn't have a good dad or something like that, and you can turn to the Father in heaven for your real father figure. So that's kind of what I'm going off of. So.
No, I think that's good, and I like what you said. There, it's for the ladies too, but with the direction towards the men, I tell you, I've got so many ideas, and one of the ones that might end up on the cutting room floor, as I've been reading in Samuel the last couple months, I'm reading about David and his son Absalom. His son tried to start an insurrection against his father, and take his dad out. And still David loved his son. Is that not the most normal father thing to do? We love our kids no matter what they do. Doesn't that just make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I like that. That's a good way. I kind of spoke something similar like that last year too. And I think it's a good thing to talk about. No matter what our kids do, we're going to love them. But could you imagine how David felt at those time periods to where he knew his son was out to get him?
Yeah. And man, as I'm reading this story, it's tearing me up, because I feel the pain of David, coming out of the word, and he was so heartbroken that it was affecting the morale of the soldiers.
Yeah.
And here, I mean, you would think of somebody coming to kill you as an enemy, but David still loved him. And I can't remember if I mentioned this on the show recently, but I watched this video. I have a true crime like algorithm that pops up on my YouTube thing, and a Piers Morgan interview popped up, and not a great fan of Piers Morgan, but I clicked on it. I thought, this looks interesting. And it was about a girl somewhere in the South that was involved in killing her family. And she killed her brother and she killed her mother, but the dad escaped. And now the dad has a relationship with his daughter in prison, even though she was involved in killing the mother and the brother. And he said that even though the daughter wasn't there in the room trying to kill him, even if she was, he would still love her and forgive her. And I just think of God's love for us, and how many times has God forgiven me? So how can I not forgive anybody that's done anything wrong to me? And there's some people that have done some pretty wrong things. But in comparison to what I've done to God
Mm.
and how many times I've sinned against him. So and the mercy, the grace that he's extended to me, how could we hold something against someone else?
Wow.
Um
Good word.
yeah, anyway, folks, throughtheblack.com is the website. I do want to mention that there is a conference coming up at the end of July, and Through the Black team is going to be there. I'm going to be there. Quite a few people are going to be there. So it's going to be Judd Burton, Mike Spalding. It's going to be Derek and Sharon Gilbert again. And Joe Horn is going to be there this time. Dr. Gregory Reed, Pastor Carl Gallops, Paul Begley, Pastor Paul Begley, L.A. Marzulli, going to give him a hug again. So Dr. Judd Burton, and it's going to be cool. I don't know if Dr. Judd is going to be there in person or not. I don't know. And then we got the crew. We got the Through the Black regulars that are going to be there hanging out behind the scenes. So it's going to be cool to hang out with everybody. But anyway, just want to mention that you can go to gothereforeconference.com to get registered. Guys, this has been one of the longest conferences, honestly, that's been going on. It started out years ago. I'll tell you, the first one that we did, it was Russ Dizdar, it was Coach Dave, it was Mike. I want to say maybe LA was there, but it was in his little church in Lima, Ohio, and it outgrew the church.
Wow.
So, and I remember, and I'm a storyteller, so I got there and they put me up. I took my youngest son with me, and they put me up in this place. I don't know what it was. It was like a youth center that had a little apartment in it. And my son was just like, we got there so late because we were hanging out with everybody. And I still had to finish my message because I was talking first thing in the morning. So I was up to 2 a.m. And my son was playing ping pong by himself in this, he was like walking around this whole place. And it was like a really, we only stayed there one night and we're like, oh dude, this place is so cool. We wish that we were staying there longer. Anyway, that was a long time ago, and the conference has been going on. I was not supposed to speak there this year. They were giving me the year off, but now I am. So that's cool, and it's going to be good to see everybody. So get out there, get registered, and we hope to see you down in at the Harvest Revival Center in Brookville, Ohio. Anyway, Pastor Shawn, you and I were just basically throwing darts at a dartboard, coming up with ideas here to do shows. Yeah. And we see something interesting, and we're like, hey, how about this? How about that? And then you never tell me no, and I never tell you no. So we just kind of go for it, right? Because we like having these conversations. So we're going to get into it tonight. I saw a clip on Joe Rogan, and I thought it was interesting, and I can't even remember the author's name. I want to say his name was Tom O'Neill, and he wrote a book called Chaos. This book came out several years ago, but he did like 30 years of research, and we're going to talk a little bit about this tonight. I'm also want to talk about the book Weird Scenes Inside of the Canyon, and what happened in the 60s with the Manson cult, Helter Skelter, what was going on with all of the rock stars out there in Laurel Canyon in California that just kind of showed up out there, randomly and met each other and began making music. There are theories that there are more than meets the eye to this. Now, when we look at music, I was raised that rock and roll was the devil's music and that the devil was behind rock and roll. Well, maybe he wasn't alone. Maybe the CIA was behind it as well.
Right.
So anyway, I mean, what is your initial reaction to this subject and music and what we're talking about here, the 60s?
I find that time period in that kind of subject fascinating. I was born in '70s, and so, I kind of grew up as a teenager in that era. But kind of looking back, I can remember the stories of Manson and stuff like that, but hearing the Beatles and hearing all the different chatter going on growing up, just kind of my first initial thoughts about the Laurel Canyon. I've listened to a lot of different theories and a lot of different people, and I think there's a lot more to it. I think there's a lot of stuff that's actually true there. And I'll just tell people, listen, some people say, well, all you guys talk about is kind of the conspiracy stuff. Well, go back and do your research, especially tonight as we talk about some of the stuff with Manson. If you go back and you really do the research and listen to Manson himself, he's telling you a ton of stuff that's really going on. And so I think it's fascinating. We're going to talk about tonight maybe, but Diane Sawyer did an interview, and I would recommend a lot of people go find that interview with Diane Sawyer, because she actually asks a couple of questions that deal with music. And I thought was, while you were just speaking, it kind of came back to mind. So we might get into that later.
So I am like jotting down notes because the spark plugs are firing over here.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think this is interesting. So I want to go to mention this book or this interview that I saw with Tom O'Neill. Okay, and you'll have to find this clip. We're not providing it tonight. So anyway, apparently this guy was on with Joe Rogan recently, and he wrote a book, 30 Years of Research on Charles Manson. And part of the premise of the book was that the CIA was behind or connected to these murders. And the reason for it, and this is the reason why I wanted to do the interview, because it connected with research that Dave McGowan had done in Weird Scenes Behind the Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. So the reason for the CIA involvement was to get people afraid of hippies. Now, apparently, the hippie movement was very powerful in the 60s, and the peace movement was very powerful, and they wanted to hijack that movement and not allow it to derail their war efforts. Of course, the war in Vietnam was going on back then, and there were lots of protests. I was not around. It was a few years before I was around too. But I remember watching the footage. I remember watching, just the documentaries. And then there was another show that I liked called The Wonder Years. And I thought that was the coolest show. It was a little sitcom about a family in the 60s going through all these things, right? It mentioned Vietnam. It mentioned Woodstock, and it had a really cool soundtrack. And just Kevin and his girlfriend, Winnie or whatever, lived there in the neighborhood. Okay. I heard a noise, and I want to make it sure it wasn't a mouse, because we had a mouse problem. But if that's a mouse, that's a big mouse. Anyway.
Maybe you gotta go.
No, that was a mouse. Holy moly. Anyway, okay.
After all, folks, you're going to see a mouse.
All right, folks. Yeah, I just I thought it was upstairs, and no, I just saw him go right across. Okay, sorry for that distraction. Real life stuff happening here in the studio. I killed one mouse today, and they want to come and disrupt the show. They're mad because I killed their brother or their mother. I don't know. Anyway, folks, back to the show. So the idea is that the CIA was involved to derail the peace movement, which is what Dave McGowan says in the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. Okay, he says that the CIA and the government and the military was involved in steering these musicians out of Hollywood so they could kind of hijack the peace movement. Okay, so when you think of music back then, there was a lot of peace music, right, coming out of San Francisco, coming out of California, and it was all about peace, stop the war. But Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon says that, and they document this very well, I might add, that the musicians that were doing this were directly connected with military intelligence. They were the children in these bands. The easiest one right now to think of is like Jim Morrison's dad was in the military. Okay, but we're talking the Mamas and the Papas. We're talking. I don't. I'm not going to crack the book open here, but a lot of these musicians were connected to military intelligence, and the idea was, hey, we can't let this peace thing get out of control. Who was asking them to basically steer this movement so it was like controlled opposition, right? We understand that idea. So anyway,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of cool too to think about it. And I was listening to another guy. I wished I could think of his name. He kind of runs I call it the LOL show that has all the true crime stuff. But he was talking about another aspect of what you were talking about with McGowan, and he said that one of the last interviews he saw with McGowan was that McGowan was also kind of getting to that point to where he was going to also say that not only was they going to redirect the music industry, but they were using different belief systems to ingrain into that and to kind of start polluting the belief systems that were out there already. So it wasn't just formatting the music, but it was also, because you think about the Beatles, even though they were anti-war a lot, they still were bringing in Crowley. They were still bringing in a lot of the Hare Krishna kind of ideas. And so a lot of that, the LSD stuff, all that was culminating about the same time period. It was a very interesting time.
Reading the chat here about the mouse and about the Beatles here. So anyway, folks, fun times in the studio. So there's a couple other things I want to mention, and I want to bring them up so we can go into them if we need to. Okay, one is Jonestown, and the suspected CIA involvement in that, and then another is the Atlanta child murders. Okay, there was suspected mind control type stuff happening there. So do you remember the Atlanta child murders?
Vaguely. You have to kind of refresh my memory on that one, I believe.
Well, I don't know what year it was. I want to say late 70s, early 80s. There were these children in Atlanta that were being killed, and I think it was close to 30. I could be wrong on that number. But they were trying to catch this killer, and they finally caught a guy, and he did not fit the profile of the person they thought could do it. But he's the one that got tried and went to prison for it. Anytime you bring up his connection to government agencies or whatever, he gets weird. I've seen an interview with him, but it makes you wonder what was going on, what kind of experiments. Okay, so we know, Pastor Shawn, that military groups have done mind control experiments. Okay, MK Ultra, the documents are out there, and we can go back and read the book Hypnotism and see that this has been happening and it's been planned out for a long time. And these people are cold-hearted. They don't care what it does to the subjects. They don't care what it does to the volunteers, right?
Right.
And I say volunteers. They say it's necessary for war when you're in a war, and they, their excuse is they want to have a soldier that if he's captured, he can disassociate, and even if he's tortured, he will not give up secrets. Or they can do vice versa. They can capture somebody, mind control them, send them back in as an agent. So I think one of the things, and I want to get your response to this, one of the things that we see back then, especially in the 60s, is a lot of experimenting, okay? And we see the groups like the FBI or the CIA show up in places and wanting to steer people, okay? They, again, a book I read, a movie I watched somewhere, they were watching the peace movement, or the 60s, basically, what am I trying to say? Civil rights movement. And they had infiltrators going into that just so they could have people strategically placed to control that movement. Okay. And I believe this for, 20, 30 years, that they took out Martin Luther King because he was speaking out against the war. Okay. So here's another connection. All right. What about JFK? Okay. Here's another connection. How much power did the war machine have in the 60s? So JFK, Martin Luther King, he was telling black folks, hey guys, don't go to war. The Vietnamese didn't do anything to you,
Right.
Don't go over there and kill him. That's not our war. So they had to take him out, and they did. Okay. I believe that for a long time. And I believe they took out JFK for similar reasons. And now here's a couple other examples of controlling the masses, making people afraid of the hippies. Hippies were leading the peace movement, but it was hippies that were involved in this crazy murder, this helter-skelter murder out in California. Shawn?
Yeah, you brought up JFK. You can go back, and there's a lot of good books out there right now that's legit, researched, sourced, and everything, talking about Oswald in his time with these agencies and their connections and training, and he's with the guy that owns the building that he was shot from, supposedly is employing Oswald when he's young, and all this different stuff going on in the background. There's definitely a lot of stuff happening. And one thing I wanted to point out tonight is we're dealing with what we call intelligence type apparatus, this intelligence community type stuff. What I've had in dealings with it and stuff, and listening to Manson and listening to all these different things, you can tell that there's stuff going on. And this intelligence stuff is, think about what their methodology is. It's like you said, to infiltrate, to put somebody that they can control the mindset of that group just by minor influences or big influences. So that's part of it, to compromise people. You talk about the LSD usage. Think about that. Where did it was developed by these intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
And for what purpose? To gain information, to extract. Then who did they test it on? Who did they run out and test it on first? The prostitutes, and they would hire prostitutes to go out and deal with and try to entrap politicians and stuff like that. And so they were going out and doing this, and that's all sourced material right there. So what was they doing behind that? as well that wasn't documented. So
Yeah.
it's there.
So here's another example of the Black Panther movement.
Hmm.
How whether it was the FBI or the CIA or both, CIA is supposed to work on international type intelligence, but they've been caught quite a few times, working domestic stuff. FBI is supposed to be domestic, but the Black Panther movement was gaining so much momentum, they had to shut it down. So what they did is they flooded the neighborhoods where these Black Panther movements were getting strong with cheap drugs.
Hmm.
And they got these people that were becoming revolutionaries addicted to drugs.
Hmm.
So, and I mean, what are the generational consequences of that? That we've seen.
You,
So,
you think about, I just want to bring this up real quick while I'm thinking about it. The war machine was really about the drug machine. If you really
mhm,
think about it, they had a ton of uh, opium and drug from that part of the world, and even going back into our modern wars from Afghanistan and such, the opium trade and all that stuff, all of that plays. Everybody kind of talks about the oil, but really, I think it was more the drug issues that was going on behind the scenes. Think about how many GIs came back from the war that were hooked on drugs themselves, not selling the drugs. You'll hear a lot of people saying that a lot of people came back from the war to deal drugs. They were actually hooked on the drugs.
yeah. Hey, I just want to say hey to everybody in the chat tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm seeing all of our friends in there, and it's so good to see you guys. Um, and names I haven't seen in a while. Super cool. So thanks. I appreciate your comments and your info. You guys know about this stuff as well. So thanks for giving us a thumbs up, and thanks for commenting. Even later in the archives. It's interesting to kind of see the abilities of these organizations, okay, and what they were experimenting with. And I want to say it again, they did not and they do not care about what happens to the person. That's just life, okay? These people are cold-hearted, and if somebody dies along the way, if some families get taken out, then hey, that's just the way that it goes. Of course, they believe in social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, right?
Mhm.
Kind of crazy, kind of crazy. So when JFK said that he was going to shatter, I think he said he was going to shatter the CIA into a million pieces. You remember that quote?
Yep. Yeah.
How long was it after that before?
48 hours, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Before they took him out, and of course, we don't understand who all was involved, but we understand that they played a big part along with the other agencies. So it makes you wonder, Pastor Shawn, if they were doing that back then, what
Mhm.
are they doing today?
Wow.
Do you think they're doing more or less? It seems like they have at their fingertips more ways to manipulate, but it seems like there's also more people aware of the
Mhm.
things that they're doing. Now, of course, they are masters at at making us look crazy, right?
Mhm.
And they've done a great job at that. So you can't even really say anything without immediately being labeled a conspiracy theorist, which I believe that term was created out of the JFK assassination. If you had a different opinion on what happened, Jim Garrison was the attorney out of New Orleans, and they created this this term conspiracy theorist, much like the term that was used in the 80s, satanic panic.
Right.
So, any thoughts on conspiracy theorists and satanic panic?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff comes to mind. The idea, sure, that there was people making stories up. Obviously, during that time period, they are today. There have been throughout history. It has
Sure.
throughout history. There's also been the real stuff that's happening. Look at all the court cases after court cases we could go to, the real stuff happening. And they use this to kind of make the average person, what they want is the average person on the street. They want them to be clueless. And if they start to wake up to something, they want them just go, oh, that's that old crazy woo stuff. That's, they just talk this crazy stuff. Don't even pay attention to them. That's kind of what they want. But the problem is, in my opinion, they forget about people having an actual brain sometimes, which maybe they're right to a certain degree, but that there's a lot of people that don't have one. But to me, it seems like when people stop and they start to think through things and they start watching things and listening and observing, they'll see the truth.
So let me jump to kind of far ahead in time. Okay. Look at what's happening in the last 5 years, especially with all of the, I guess the way I want to word it, just to keep it simple, is this new movement that wants to mutilate children. How do we get here so quick? It's insane that these things are happening. Now, when you follow the money of the people that are paying for this stuff, it all leads back to the IT companies and these big tech companies that are paying for this, that believe in the singularity, that believe in there's going to be connection. What do we call it? Well, the singularity is what we call it, between humans and computers.
Yep.
So there's another word I'm looking for, but I can't remember what it is. But
I remember you and Jared talking about the 2045 movement. You remember that?
Yeah.
I've been keeping an eye on that, and that is furthering along, as it's a little bit behind schedule. But if you ever want to study, if folks want to go down a rabbit hole, look up 2045 initiative. In just that 2045 initiative, and you'll see what we're talking about in that respect. But yeah, people wanting to have this machine type, mixing with Elon Musk and all these kinds of different things going on. And there's a movement behind everything that we see. It's not just the destruction of the children from abortion, but it's the destruction of the children's ideology about who they are. They're not even human. I mean, they're wanting to push this agenda that, you can be whatever you want to be. Just think about it. Just whatever you want to be, just do it. And if you listen, that's what Manson was teaching back then. Several times during an interview with Diane Sawyer, he's like, look, she would ask him point blank, did you tell them to go kill? And he would say, no, I didn't tell them to go kill. I just told them I want my friends free from jail. You go do whatever you got to do to go do it. That's on them. And he would keep saying that. But that's mind control, and that's what we see going on.
I can't remember who the person was, but I remember seeing an interview with one of the Manson girls, and they said that when they were out on the ranch, or whether it was it the Spawn movie ranch or whatever.
Yeah.
They were running around out there, and who knows what was going on all the time. And they said, when you would come up and run into Charles Manson somewhere, he would stop and he would make these hand motions, and he would expect you to mirror him.
Mm.
And he would, he would stop in front of a girl, and he would do, some things like this. And I'm just remembering the interview, and she said he would, put his hand like this, and then he would want you to do it, and just, to demonstrate the control that he had over these his followers.
Mm-hmm.
And
he had to be trained somewhere. I mean, he just for a hoodlum, and he even called himself a hoodlum. He said,
Yeah.
I was just a hoodlum coming out of prison. But there were several times during those several interviews I watched, there's something that happened to him. He kept saying it several times. I changed when I got out of that last prison. I was changed. And that just stuck with me. Somebody had to be teaching him this stuff.
Kind of interesting, because I mean, okay, let's just speculate here for a second. Here's a guy who basically has no family, no support system, in prison, the child of a prostitute out of Cincinnati, Ohio, I think.
Yep.
He's got no support system, part of the institution, and the government has access to him, just like the government has access to the soldiers. Hey, this time we're going to do experiments on inmates. I had a good friend who was an inmate, and he went to prison on some crazy charges. He was guilty. He did his time. He was actually aiding and abetting in a murder. He knew about a murder, and he didn't say anything about it. So anyway, went to jail, got saved, and God turned his life around. Anyway, he believes he got chipped in prison, and he can't prove it. And I don't want to get into that whole story tonight, but I thought he was crazy at the time until I met Russ, and then Russ told me some stuff, and I went back to that guy and apologized and tried to help him. So the just like soldiers who are isolated, okay, the same thing with prisoners, and they have access to them. They're they're a captive audience in a way. So who knows? That could very well be a possibility of what they did.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too. People think, well, what's going on today? I just watched a briefing on the internet from talking about Russia, and I didn't realize this. There's a group that's fighting for Russia. It's called the Wagner Group, and that Wagner Group is actually pulling people out of the prison system and telling them, you're not going to live. If you happen to live through this, we'll let you go, but if you're probably going to die. And they would send these people to the front, and their job was to go out and find where these machine guns. Well, how are you going to find it? You go out and you stand. Basically, what they were forcing these groups of 12 men that were prisoners to go run out in the field and see where the guns are coming from. And I just thought, I thought today, we live in a time period where we think we're so civilized, yet we still have this kind of stuff happening. So to the people who sit down and say this stuff isn't happening, you need to wake up and kind of see what's going on around you.
Yeah. And we brought up this issue many times. The guy about 10 years ago went into a Navy base and opened fire. And he complained about ELFs, extremely low frequencies. Interestingly enough, we're going to do a show on frequencies coming up here. Yep. Probably our next show, whenever that is. Real quick, may not be a show next week. We might take the week off next week because I got something I gotta go to, guys. But we'll be we want to talk about frequencies. That's another example, Shawn. Is I said, was it you or me? I don't know whose idea it was. I said, what do you guys think about frequencies? And then you came back, and then so we're going to talk about it. Interesting stuff in a couple weeks. But so anyway, guys, was, I mean, we want to hear from you. What do you think? I I think that this is still going on today, and I think that there are, whether they're unwittings or whether they are happy volunteers of people that are entertainers, whether they're actors or musicians, that are either blackmailed again or willingly involved in manipulating the public. Okay. So whether, and of course, whether it has to do with politics. Now, Shawn, a lot of musicians and actors are very liberal. Okay. So it makes sense that they're going to take the side of the politician that's going to kill the most babies, right? Just, as a,
Right.
breaking it down and making it very simple. So that makes sense. But we do see these talking points put out there, and we see celebrities fall in line with whatever they may be. Okay. And again, that may not necessarily be mind control. They could be willing to do it, or it could be blackmail. We can, look at what happened with Jeffrey Epstein and the control he had over what, the things that he was trying to get over politicians, okay, and celebrities. If you can blackmail a celebrity, you can get them to really influence people. Man, look at somebody like Taylor Swift. Probably one of the greatest bait and switch stories. I mean, there's several of them. There's Miley Cyrus. There's, all of these Disney people that basically got this amazing following of young girls or young kids, and then they completely just flipped the script, later on, and led them down a pretty dark path. All of the followers that just kind of naturally gravitated, to them. So this stuff is still going on. Some of it's more blatant. Look at, I mean, when we were growing up, it was all heavy metal, right? It was all the heavy metal guys that were Satanists and stuff. Yeah. But now it's the pop stars. And I mean, we've seen that in the last 15 years, really. It's like unbelievable pop stars with the symbols and with the hand signs and with the clothing and with the imagery, the dark imagery in the music videos. So there's definitely an agenda, going on there. Never thought it would be so out in the open.
Yeah. I was thinking just now, you remember listening to TV shows back in the 50s, 60s, well, even earlier, when as soon as TV starts coming out, who do they have sitting in the audience most of the time, who kept tabs on what was being said, not only for the filthy language, but against the government? They had these people. I forgot what the name was, but I'm trying to think of the name. I was sitting there trying to think of the name. They're like censors. They would censor, and if somebody messed up and said a bad word, they looked over in the audience, and that guy was sitting right there, and he would find them.
Talk about like somebody like the FCC, the Federal Communications
Yeah,
Commission.
but you couldn't say anything bad about the government. You couldn't say anything. Think about that kind of influence. It's still happening. It's just in more subtle ways. In the movie industry, how many movies are going to the government and saying, "Hey, can we have your input on this?" And they can't do certain things. But anyway, talking also about this idea of frequencies and music. It's interesting that Manson wrote music.
Mm-hmm.
And that some of the Beach Boys, and I don't know exactly the details on this, but like the Beach Boys had a song or was going to do a song of his until all that happened. And some
that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point, Pastor Shawn. I got a couple. I just thought of something. What if Charles Manson look at the guy. If he didn't end up the way that he did, he could have been the leader of a band.
Yeah, or a high producer in Hollywood.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, you could see this guy on stage leading people in a concert, right? He had that kind of weird charisma.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he was able to get people to, do his bidding as far as murder. I had a theory that John Benet Ramsey was being groomed to be like a Britney Spears type of person.
Mm.
And I think this is just my personal theory. I think they accidentally killed her in a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I think if she would have lived, she would have grown up to be like a Britney Spears type of actress slash pop singer. And I mean, she had all, I don't know. She was in a beauty pageant. She had the name Jean Benet, and she was, all of these things were there. So how many, I mean, we could take a look at the Hampstead case and see, here's an actor, a wannabe actor, Ricky Dearman. And it comes out that his kids said that he was doing rituals. Okay. The guy was compromised. He was perfect to be entered into the system as somebody that could be controlled.
Mm.
Okay. So, I mean, thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, it's the John Bonet thing. I think I've had that same theory about the ritual aspect. There's just too many little odd things that were found, that they talk about, like she was eating cereal or corn or something like that. Is really strange. And then that whole night was a weird night, and the whole, the following day. But coming back to it, I agree 100% with what you were saying. She was being groomed, and I have friends that were doing beauty pageants, and I've kind of set them aside and talked to them, and I've had a couple of people kind of come out of that, because once they seen what I was sharing, and I'm trying to walk a fine line here, but I'm just going to come out and say it. I believe beauty pageants for kids is very, very wrong. I'll just say it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's wrong to try to sexualize and dress little girls up like that, little boys up. In my opinion, that is grooming first. That's first level.
Yeah, they're making them very, I mean, very adult like, right?
Yeah.
Why would you want to put makeup on a child? Anyway.
But anyway, yeah, I agree with what you were saying there.
Yeah. I got one for you, Pastor. Boxcar Willie. Boxcar Willie. You remember this guy?
Yep.
I remember on Saturday night, he used to have almost like these infomercial commercials where it would, who is this guy? He came out of nowhere, and it just said Boxcar Willie, and you can get his records. And he was covering all, he was mostly covering like Hank Williams and all these country songs. I didn't know he didn't write them back then. I was just a kid. But Kathy O'Brien said that Boxcar Willie was a handler. I don't know if it's true or not.
I hadn't heard that one. That's a new one.
Yeah. But when she was exposing him, she made reference to his commercials, and that he was a MK Ultra dude. Boxcar Willie was.
Oh, wow.
I wonder. I don't know if Katie can bring up a Boxcar Willie commercial or not, but play it. It shouldn't be hard to find. But according to Kathy O'Brien, Boxcar Willie was in on it, and he was a handler. By the way, Branson, Missouri, was a hot spot, and they were trying to make Branson, Missouri, the new Nashville, and they were going to traffic drugs out of there and everything. you guys do your own research. You know, a lot of this stuff is speculation. Here we go. Here's Boxcar Willie. Go ahead and play it.
Worry me half as much as you do.
He's won 14 gold albums. From Hee Haw to the Grand Ole Opry, he makes people happy with good, honest country music everyone loves. Boxcar Willie.
I let the moon of Kentucky keep on shining.
Now the special magic of Boxcar Willie is captured in his all-new 2-record collection.
I got a feeling cold of blues, oh Lord, since my baby said goodbye.
2 complete albums.
Hey, you get down the middle and you get down.
Okay. Anyway, you guys, Louisiana Saturday Night. I love that song. My youngest son reintroduced me to that song, Louisiana Saturday Night. Yeah, according to Kathy O'Brien, Boxcar Willie was an MK Ultra handler. So, you know, take that and do with it what you want, folks. We're going down some strange trails here in the canyon,
Strange.
Shawn, and I don't know if we're living up to the thumbnail that we put. I think people tuned in here and wanted us to talk about Charles Manson. Here's the thing: even without the CIA or anything else, Charles Manson had some issues, right?
Oh yeah.
So I don't know that he needed the CIA's help, but it's fascinating to say the least. I don't want to be that guy that says everybody's in on it and everything is controlled. I don't think that. I think some things happen naturally. Okay. I don't think everybody is groomed. I don't think everybody that's making the hand signs knows what they're doing. Okay. A lot of them do, but not everybody does. Okay. I don't think everybody wears a red bracelet, knows what it means or what, I don't even think we know what it means, okay? Just because somebody told us that's what it means, okay? So, again, I think we got to have truth as our foundation, because if we don't have truth, then everything's going to crumble. We make it pretty clear that we do a lot of speculating on this show. Now, there's a lot of people that we talk to and things that we know behind the scenes and that we can't share. We could talk about a lot of celebrities, and we've gotten the calls. Okay, how about this? And I'm not going to be able to articulate this, but Russ Dizdar was at a conference in Wisconsin with Tiny Tim's widow. You know who Tiny Tim was?
Yep. Tiny Tim.
Tiptoe Through the Tulips. So, and now here's the thing. I don't know if she was just curious and coming to a conference or if she knew more. Now, I will say this, and I shouldn't say too much, but we have people that are connected to us that are talking to pretty big, very well known musicians that have stories that go along with Through the Black type stuff. I can't really say too much more, but we know that it's still happening. We know that it's still going on. And when people try to come out and talk about these things, they get labeled as crazy. They get labeled as they're having a psychological breakdown, something like that. Pastor?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like you said, if people don't want to, they'll label you as crazy if you're trying to help somebody in the spiritual realm. I like what somebody right here, I think it was Anita, says Manson parole hearing when he raps. It's interesting. Have you heard Manson rap?
No.
He did it twice, I think, in that interview with Diane Sawyer. And every time he rapped in that interview, I believe he was triggered because she asked him a straightforward question, and you could tell when he got flustered, he would automatically start kind of like a and he would go into a rhythm of music would come out of him. and then he would begin to say things, and then it wouldn't make sense at all. I mean, it would be like the sky's red and blue and white. Yeah, hey man, yeah, yeah. And it's like,
Yeah.
what's going on, dude? I think that would. I don't know if that would be part of programming or type of schizophrenia type stuff or what, but one of the things that really interested me before we kind of tag off is tonight, he kept using the term in almost every interview I watched him. He kept using the term two worlds, that there's two worlds. I know about the two worlds. I know about the two worlds. And he just keep repeating that. And Diane Sawyer picked up on it, and she says, well, what is the two worlds that you keep talking about? And he stopped and he looked, and it's probably one of the first times I've seen him stop and like with a very lucid and says, there's your world and my world. I live underneath in the dark world. And then he kind of backed off and he was talking about this idea of the rich and the poor. He says, I'm not talking about the idea of the rich and the poor. I'm talking about those people who are following orders and people who are not. And I thought I thought that was interesting. And if you listen to him, the next time you listen to him, listen for that rap and listen also for that idea of, I think there was something happening to him with the military because he kept using military term like when you follow the dude and he says down, give me 20 or 10 hut, and he would do that. That was him saying that he's being controlled, in my opinion only. I think he's saying that that's when he was learning to be controlled.
Interesting. What the other side of the coin is, what if all these people are actually being controlled? And we're just that naive, or let me speak for myself. I'm just that naive that I don't believe it all. Okay. I don't know.
I mean,
the devil he's been working on his plan for 2,000 years, and he's doing pretty good at it, right?
I think it was Russ one afternoon. I was hearing him talk, and you may correct me on this. I think Russ said one time, somebody asked him about somebody being in control, and he's like, well, we don't have to have an actual person to be in control of that other person. We know that the dark world controls a lot of things. They don't have to control. We don't, who are the they? Well, the they is the dark side. The dark side is ruling it. It might not be the devil himself, but it might be someone else. And so I think we sometimes have to realize that man's heart is evil. And when the Bible tells us that when we follow our heart in that respect, our heart is going to do evil intent and evil motivation. So I think, to kind of wrap it up, whether he was being controlled or not, his dark side was controlling him either way.
Yeah. Well, and it's as if the devil is playing all these people like an orchestra. He's conducting it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it's everything is going to come to an end or a crescendo that's going to satisfy him. Last week, Shawn, we played a clip of Tucker Carlson, and we had a viewer that was too much for them. They checked out. They're like, you know what? We followed you through some stuff, but that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I mentioned that because my wife and I have actually watched that whole interview. We just played a clip last week, but the whole thing is like 3 hours long.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't agree with a lot of the stuff that was in the interview. And it got a little bit of kind of new agey type stuff. I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just because of lack of discipleship. Okay. And it was more for the interviewer, Shawn Ray, than it was for Tucker Carlson. But I'm pretty impressed with some things that were said, and basically to the same thing that we're saying tonight. Tucker Carlson is saying, This is spiritual. And what's happening, it's not normal, for these things to happen. It's got to be supernatural. There's got to be something that we can't see behind all of this. And that's what he just kept coming back to. So, and I was actually watching an interview that dropped tonight before I came down here. He was saying the same thing, new Alex Jones interview that dropped tonight. And he's saying it doesn't make sense that people all throughout history just decided to sacrifice their children.
Right.
What's behind that? We understand why people do it today because we're influenced by social media and it's trendy to kill babies through abortion, right? But what about 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago? What was telling them to do it? Okay. And Tucker Carlson said demons. So kind of coming full circle, to what we were just talking about is the devil is conducting this orchestra and he's doing a good job at it. And not everybody's got to be in on it, but he can use people that are unwittings and people, and that's a term that Russ used to use, unwittings. And, you are completely vulnerable if you are not sold out to Jesus Christ. So I would say this: sell out to Jesus Christ. There's no better way to live.
Amen.
Pastor Shawn, I'm going to let you close it out tonight.
Well, just folks know, whether we're talking about Manson or we're talking about the conspiracy theories, as Tom and we just talked about the last 5 or 10 minutes, we all have that propensity to sin, and we all have that things that, we have to be careful about, and not to be controlled or not to be, going off the rails. We need Jesus, and people around us need Jesus. And so tonight we just want to make sure before we close off of here that that Jesus Christ died for your sins, that he alone is the only way that you can get rid of the darkness in your heart. I don't know if I could ever sit down with someone like Charles Manson, but I really would love to have the opportunity to sit down and share the gospel and say, hey, and just, listen to all the craziness that he gives. But yet that's what God calls us to do. And so right where you're at, if you're a Christian, share the gospel with people, wade through the darkness and go to them. That's what, Through the Black is all about, is wading through that darkness and bringing the light to them and just sharing the gospel, letting them know that there's hope and there's a different way that God can and will forgive sin and bring white light into your life. And so with that, I'll give it back over to Tom.
Hey guys, don't forget about the Go Therefore conference coming up at the end of July. GoThereforeConference.com to get registered. We're going to take next week off. I'm going to be at an event, and we will be back in a couple weeks, probably talking about frequencies. So God bless you guys. Thanks. Hey folks, I just met the witches and Satanists, and they're going to allow me to do an interview with them. So let's see what happens.